And we are coming onto the air tonight with breaking news. Just within the last half hour, NBC News has learned that the United States military has carried out new strikes in Iran, shooting down multiple Iranian drones, with the U.S. official calling them defensive. Now, this major escalation coming as Iran was a huge topic of discussion at the White House earlier today, where President Trump held his 11th public cabinet meeting of his second term. We're going to break down the very latest from Iran in just a second. But first, here's what the president and Secretary Marco Rubio said about the status of negotiations before these new strikes.
Iran is very much intent. They want very much to make a deal. So far, they haven't gotten there. We're not satisfied with it, but we will be.
There's an agreement to be made. We want that to be made. I think there's been some progress and some interest, and we'll see over the next few hours and days whether progress could be made.
And then after that, motioning over to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to his left, Trump said this.
They are starting to give us the things that they have to give us. And if they do, that's great. And if they won't, then the man on my left is going to finish them off.
Well, let's bring in NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez for the very latest. Gabe, this announcement, this came just minutes ago about this attack. What do we know?
Well, yes, Scotty. According to a U.S. official, the U.S. military conducting this latest round of attacks on incoming Iranian drones, as well as one ground control station in southern Iran. Now, Gotti, we should point out this does not mean that the fragile ceasefire is, over, or that, there has been a resumption of major combat operations. To the contrary, according to this official, the ceasefire is still in effect, but this latest round of strikes was defensive in nature. And Gotti, we had heard that several days ago. I believe on Monday, the Central Command, U.S. Central Command, had said the same thing, that the U.S. had conducted some defensive operations. But it really raises the question, doesn't it? Where are we in this ceasefire if every few days there is this resumption of even minor attacks, shooting down some drones, perhaps trying to take out any ground control stations or any individual ships? The U.S. is trying to make the case that these are one-offs, but that negotiations are continuing. And certainly that's what we heard from President Trump and his top administration officials today right here at the White House during that cabinet meeting that you mentioned, another marathon cabinet meeting, where we heard the president reiterate that he would not accept what he calls a, quote, crummy agreement, and he was instructing his team to continue negotiations. And there was a lot of back and forth today about what exactly that and those negotiations entail, with Iranian state TV putting forth this draft proposal, this draft memorandum of understanding that it said was the framework or an outline of a framework of a potential deal. And then the White House came back and said just a few hours later that it was a complete fabrication. So a lot of questions about where we are in these negotiations. But again, that breaking news, we're now learning another round of very limited strikes, according to a U.S. official, to take out some Iranian drones and this ground control station in southern Iran, Gotti.
And just to put this into context, I mean, this ceasefire has been going on for quite some time. There were strikes over the weekend that were very similar to this, right?
Yes, that's right. Over the weekend and into Monday, the U.S. had struck, I believe it was these southern Iran. There were boats attempting to lay mines, as well as missile launch sites. That's what Central Command had said at the time. And really, again, the U.S. is trying to make the case that these are small one-offs, and not the first time that there had been some minor exchange of fire here. But according to that U.S. official in this latest round of strikes, that no military or civilian targets were hit. So again, this is not an interruption of that ceasefire, but it does raise questions about where we go from here and whether these negotiations will ultimately prove fruitful. These negotiations, of course, that are ongoing even as both the U.S. and Iran interact with these minor strikes against either drones or these missile launch sites, Scotty.
Yeah, very fiery for a ceasefire. I do want to play a little bit more from the president when he was asked about how the war in Iran could possibly impact midterm elections here at home. Let's listen to that.
I don't care about the midterms. Look what happened last night. That was the prelude to the midterms. People understand it. They know that, very simple, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
So the president there saying that he sees last night as a big win for him, but set the playing field for us here.
Yeah, and Gadi, look, this is the president pointing to that resounding landslide victory in Texas last night during that Senate primary by his chosen candidate, the candidate he endorsed, the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, defeated the long-term incumbent John Cornyn. The president seeing this as a major victory, but his comments there raising a lot of eyebrows in Washington and really among Republicans across the country who are wondering whether the president is not really realizing that it could be difficult for Republicans to hold control of Congress, especially with comments like that, Gotti.
Yeah, so much to keep track of. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much, reporting from the White House.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.